Alright, so before we get into everything else, big disclaimer here at the start. This build has only been tested by me at high investments, which means 1 Mira plus. Now, if we talk about the build as a whole, I've heard people in my community who've been leveling the build up on less investment and they've said they've been absolutely crushing, but I don't know what those cutoffs are. So if you're working on a budget, if you haven't been playing for 7 weeks, for example, if you just started, if you haven't gotten those Mira shards yet from the shipments, then I would probably stay away from this build. I will point out that I will be league start testing this one as well, because I think it is such a intriguing skill to make work, because if you can somehow make it work, even at decent damage, it is just such a clear speed powerhouse that it is worth investigating. But just to point that out. And I have a feeling that even if you can't afford it, just knowing how the skill works for the future, kind of knowing how it is geared, what skill gems to use, is going to be potentially very good in the future. And then also this build isn't very good at two particular things that people are doing right now. The first one is Ubers. Now, personally, I don't find Ubers very appealing. So for me, my builds are generally not that good at Ubers because I don't really spec into anything that we need at Ubers. But I mean, it's pretty obvious. Like, they stand in the middle of a room. There's 0 walls anywhere. You can't really use Headhunter. You would have to completely redo your build for Mage Blood. And even then, the damage is not high enough without potential overlaps. You can do it, it's just painful, right? It's like saying you can do Ubers on a league starter. It's like, yeah, if you're good enough at the game, you can. But you're not going to be standing there and popping 100 of them. And then it's also not very good at the tier 17 Titanic Rogue Exhaust farm. You might have seen Fubgun do that one. That strat on tier 17s in general needs a multi-Mira build, which this technically is, right? We're hovering in the Mira like range, 1 to 2 Miras. But I would personally recommend Lightning Strike or Penance Brand for that, because it has a higher power ceiling in terms of that. You can invest even more and more and more into it. I think this is something that is pretty irrelevant for most people. I just wanted to point it out. But now let's talk about Kinetic Blast of Clustering. And I will just show this without any support gems. So this is what you see right here. It is just a single projectile. No matter how many projectiles you scale, it still only has 1 initial projectiles, but extra projectiles will give you extra explosions once you collide with something, right? That could be either a wall or an enemy, or as we can see later, a tornado. This skill got a huge buff this league, just as Kinetic Blast did. Both of these skills got 115% base attack speed instead of 100%, so basically 15% more. And they both got increases and reductions to spell damage, also applied to attack damage from this skill at 200% of the value. What that means is, if you have any sort of spell damage, it also counts for attack damage, but also doubles, which gives us crazy Indigon scaling, which we'll go into later. Now, I'll show you real quickly how this skill actually looks like once you put everything in. You put your Spell Slinger in for Tornado, you have your Awakened Fork, you have your Returning Proj, and then all of a sudden, this skill looks like this, because now it has something to explode into. Now, I'll quickly shout out, in terms of MTX, Heritage Kinetic Blast for me, personally, is the best FPS, followed by the Celestial Kinetic Blast, which is a lot nicer on the eyes, as you can see right here. It looks a little bit less impressive, but it is a slightly worse FPS for me personally. And then the original is actually really, really bad, as you can see right here. This one is the laggiest out of them all. So you could call this a pay-to-win build. But now quickly on how this skill actually looks like, because it's kind of hard to explain in-game. So you shoot a projectile from here, right? We're not even doing any tornado shenanigans. Let's say it collides with an enemy right here. The projectile hits, deals damage, but then the explosions actually happen around them in a circle, right? And the more AoE you have, the harder it is actually to overlap enemies, because otherwise the skill would be completely broken and you would overlap, I don't know, 7-8 times, and you would have the best clear speed and the best single. Like, it would be mayhem, right? So that's what happens. If you hit something in the middle, you're most likely not hitting it again with the explosions. However, there's 2 things that change this equation. The first one are walls. For example, if there's a wall behind the enemy, now all of these explosions that are usually spawning back there are going to spawn up front and also overlap on the enemy, and they can shotgun. And you will notice that depending on what tier 17 you do, for example, if you do Abomination, you will see your single target go up through the roof versus something like, for example, fighting Katarina. Now, the second thing that will change this equation of only hitting once is Tornado. So what happens on this build basically is I have a Spell Slinger equipped with Tornado. That means that whenever I press my button for my main skill, in front of me, a tornado is going to appear. The reason why this always works is because the tornado is instant cast, because it's a spell from Spell Slinger, whereas the projectile has a projectile speed. So it needs to travel from you to wherever the tornado is. That means that the projectile is always going to first hit the tornado. What then happens is the following. The first thing that happens is it hits a target and causes explosions. So now the explosions, let's say our enemy is over there, right? This is the X, the enemy. Now it's going to hit the tornado here, and now the explosions are all of a sudden spawning up there because they're spawning around the tornado, which means multiple explosions theoretically, usually it's 1 to 2, will also hit the target behind it, the single target from the explosions. That's not all that happens though. The second thing that happens is the projectiles will fork out because you have fork. So for example, if there is a wall nearby, now these projectiles will go towards the walls, hit here, and once again, make explosions, right? And these can once again also overlap in the middle. And they can do that from both sides, right? So you can imagine that depending on the layout, this skill goes absolutely crazy. But okay, let's just pretend like there's no walls nearby. It will still fork out. Let's say it forks out into infinity, right? Like it's not always the perfect scenario. What you also have though is you have 25% chance here and 50% chance here for an additional projectile when forking. And in case you don't know how this works, that extra projectile gets added straight. Now I'll put out the returning projectiles a little bit more for visibility. If you can see right here, there is one going left, one going right, and then there's one going straight up top. And that is a 75% chance on every hit. It looks kind of like it's 100% because I have a lot of attack speed, but it is 75% chance. So what happens when that 75% chance procs is the explosions from colliding with the tornado already hit the boss back there, but then the projectile keeps traveling through the middle, once again, also to the boss. Now, those explosions, unless there's a wall behind it, are not going to overlap again. Once again, as we talked about before, they're only going to hit once. But now you have that one hit plus the explosions from the tornado collision. And if there's walls involved, it just goes crazy. One thing missing in this equation is obviously returning projectile, which makes everything even crazier. Because now you have projectiles coming back, which on the way back can also collide with tornado potentially, and walls and enemies. If you ask me how often this skill actually hits, the answer is kind of yes, but it also just depends completely on your layout. So choosing your layout correctly can be the difference of you having hundreds of millions of damage and you having 5 to 10. So what you can also glean from this is that positioning is quite important against single targets. You don't just want to stand on top of them like this point blank. You actually want to stand a little bit away from them so that your tornado gets hit here and the explosions overlap kind of like there, and then the enemy is there. So there is kind of like a science to this. This is something you'll just have to kind of try out. But in general, it is important that you don't just stand on top of the enemy. Otherwise, all those overlaps will completely go to waste. Now let's talk about why I'm actually mana stacking. And the reason is pretty simple. This skill incentivizes you to do so. It gives you added physical damage equal to 16% of maximum mana, 15% at level 20. Important to note here, this is maximum mana. So reserving your mana does actually not reduce your damage here in any shape or form. It does still reduce the impact that something like Mind over Matter has and how much mana you will actually spend with Indigon. So it's still important to not, in my opinion, reserve more mana, but you want to have at least 5k mana for Hierophant's increased AoE right here. You need 5k mana to get the full AoE bonus. Now, to give you a little bit of an insight of how much this is, let's say I had a straight up 7k mana instead of 7.4k mana to make it a little bit easier. 7,000 times 0.16. This gives me a total of 1,120 flat physical damage, which then gets multiplied by the attack speed of my wands. That is multiple times as much as a Mirror Tier Fizz wand. And not only that, it also means that I can use my weapon prefixes as stat sticks because I already get all my flat damage from my gem itself. So that means I can have stuff like max mana, Fizz as extra, and also stuff like spell damage. Plus, it means that I can dual wield without needing 3 Fizz prefixes on both of them because it's global damage. It counts for both. This heavily incentivizes you to go either in stacker or mana stacker. Personally, I think if we're talking 5+ mirrors, in stacker will probably be even better than this, and I don't even want to imagine where this build can go at those kind of investments, but I'll probably never find out. Either way, that is the biggest reason why you want to scale mana. But the second biggest reason is also Indigon because of how, like I said, Kinetic Blast got changed this league. 200% of spell damage value gets converted to attack damage, which means, for example, if Indigon gives you a maximum of 2000% increased spell damage, instead it's 4000. The way you proc Indigon is actually through Arcane Cloak. Whenever Arcane Cloak consumes mana, it actually spends it. It even says so here. That is why whenever Arcane Cloak goes off, my main skill gets a lot more expensive, and then I kind of start this loop where my main skill will actually expend enough mana. Are we always on 20k? Definitely not. We're not always getting 4000% increased damage, but it's not like you need 4000 in order to make this helmet be insane. By the way, if you're wondering why I don't have increased or more duration, is it called now, on my Arcane Cloak, that is exactly for this reason. I wanted to proc more often, not for the buff to be up more. The buff of Arcane Cloak, the defensive one, is definitely nice. The offensive one does almost nothing with how much base damage you are getting from your main skill already. So all I want is to proc as often as possible. And even though the uptime theoretically would be better with more duration, technically you're spending way less mana, so your Indigon has less damage potential. Now then we also have Mind Over Matter as a defensive layer because of mana, which is quite strong simply because we don't really need regen because we have the Leech. A lot of the spellcasters have the problem that they need to scale an absolute crap ton of mana regen to make Mind Over Matter and their mana cost feel comfy. With Leech on mana and then also instant Leech with the amount of projectiles and the amount of overlaps you've already seen, and coupled with mana on kill, this actually becomes pretty smooth for sustain. But let's talk about sustaining Indigon, because Indigon has a nasty downside, right? It wants you to spend a lot of mana, but at the same time, it also gives you a ton of mana cost, because otherwise the whole cycle wouldn't work. So you get increased mana cost for each 200 total mana spent recently. As you can see right here, whenever my Arcane Cloak is popping, which is going to be in a second, some of my mana gets consumed, and then you see my mana cost go up like crazy, right? You see 220 mana cost, it goes to 21 again, and once we're gonna spend, it's going to go up again, because once again, Arcane Cloak counts as spending mana. Now I'll just wait here and we're just gonna start attacking, right? So I'm attacking here, and you can see right here that I'm spending quite a bit of mana right now. And I should not be getting any mana back because I'm not hitting anything, right? I'm not in combat, so I'm not leeching. So why the hell am I still kind of ramping up mana a little bit? It is quite RNG though, to be fair, right? So when you're in combat with leech involved, with mana on kill, it's usually fine. It's not perfect by any means, but it helps out a lot. But the last missing piece to the puzzle was chance to recover mana on, I guess, skill use, I should say, which you get from two places. The first one is from the passive tree here. You get 10%, but that is not enough, and it also stacks additively with a Watcher's Eye mod. And that is the last mod on the Watcher's Eye right here, up to 15% chance to recover 10% of mana when you use a skill while affected by Clarity, which is why we have a level 1 Clarity in there. And yeah, that solves a lot of stuff, especially if you're, I don't know, maybe missing. You shouldn't be missing, but in general, it's just another piece of the puzzle. Then Leech, quite obvious. When you're in combat, that is going to be the most of your recovery. It's even crazier than this. And then percentage mana on kill, also from Mind Drinker, which is very comfy during clear. Now, in terms of defenses, I'm just gonna quickly glance over it because this is a very well-known mana shell. I did get to actually include suppression in this version, which I didn't back then on the Frostbolt Archmage, but it is a lot easier because you want to be on this side anyways for the fork node, for the additional proj, so it's kind of semi-free, quote-unquote. But one of the things for defenses that I want to explain is Corrupted Soul, because I've seen a lot of people actually cut this out of their mana stackers, and it is something that, for example, Steel Mage did a lot back then, that I did back then, and I just want to kind of like dial back if you care about defenses at all. I understand that this doesn't really do much in PoB, but I'll quickly explain how it works. So the reason why Corrupted Soul is so goddamn good, 50% of non-chaos damage taken bypasses ES, and then you get some ES. The funny part is gaining the ES is actually not the biggest upset. The first line is the big one. Let me explain. Okay, so you have a lot of ES from Sanctuary of Thought, and you want to make use of that, but it's kind of hard to do on a mana stacker because you have Mind Over Matter, which doesn't synergize with it. This only works with damage that you take from life, not with damage that you take from yes. So the reason why Corrupted Soul is so goddamn strong is because you have quite a bit of ES from Sanctuary of Thought. You get 20% of your mana as extra yes, right? And you want to make use of that, but you can't really because Mind Over Matter has anti-synergy with ES because it only works for any damage you take from life. So what happens is, until all your ES is depleted, your mana does absolutely nothing defensively. Only after that, it does the 50-50 split with 40% of damage taken from here and 10% from here, 50-50 split between life and mana, but it doesn't work for Yes. And during this time of your Yes getting hit, none of your other recovery even goes in. All your mana leech, all your life leech is completely wasted. However, what happens with Corrupted Soul is 50% of your damage bypasses your energy shield. So what happens is 50% of your damage goes to Yes now, but the other 50% gets split up between life and mana, because it goes for your life, and then it checks for mind over matter, and it now also goes to your mana. Which means that all your recovery methods, all your leech, all your regain, and all of that stuff works at once in tandem, and it gives you a ton of extra protection. It basically makes you almost immune to dots. It is one of the most incredible keystones for this kind of archetype, and I would not want to miss it on any of my mana stackers. As for Ascendancy, in my opinion, there are two choices right here for this version of the build. The first one is Hero, and the second one is Inquisitor. For Inquisitor, the nice thing is you get Inevitable Judgment without having to buy the Forbidden Flesh, Forbidden Flame. The downside is you will have quite a bit less mana, and you lose all the AoE and the ES from Sanctuary of Thought. So you're going to be quite a bit squishier, and your clear speed is going to be worse. And Hierophant has 3 insane nodes. The first one is Divine Guidance, second one Sanctuary of Thought, which gives you all the AoE you need in the world, and then you obviously also have Conviction of Power, which gives you Endurance charges, which are really strong. For the last point, there's actually not much to do, as a lot of attack-based Hierophants know. Mana Regen doesn't really do anything. Arcane Search doesn't do anything. What I did is I basically put in a 4-link Ballista setup, and I just put in Pursuit of Faith. I was kind of like, well, it's free anyways, so I might as well put in some Ballistas. I'm almost never using it, because for the content I don't really need it. I guess if you wanted to do Ubers, this would be nice. I put it down at tier 70 bosses, for example. But in general, Hierophant is just an absolute no-brainer. And if you don't have money for the Inevitable Judgment, the first thing I would do is, which I actually did before, is go Forces of Nature for the enemy Revert Mastery. And all of a sudden, you have a lot of extra damage. So that is the way I would work around that. Or maybe try to fit in Trinity. But I would personally not go Inquisitor. Now, to showcase, I'll quickly show you a A-bomb map right here. It has monster life, unique monster possessed, some extra damage. Cannot regen isn't really an issue, or shouldn't be at least. Buff some player expire faster, which is going to make our Headhunter a lot worse, but it is what it is. As for what I'm going to use, doesn't really matter. I'm just using a passive tree with all the map modifier effects, so it gets a little bit harder. Only don't do this one because I don't have quality usually. I guess we can respec that real quickly. If we wanted to, so we don't want breaches anyways, so make this even a little bit harder. So not much to be said here. If you're using your ballistas, you have your ballistas for single target damage, right? They're right here. You have a Sigil of Power to put down at bosses, cool. You have a Valhaste you can press here or there. You have a Smoke Mine, which you want to press very often actually, and then you have your Kinetic Blast of Clustering. There isn't really anything else to it, but I'll still show you how it goes. So you go in, usually your Tormented Spirit take a little bit to proc, but that doesn't really matter. Actually, did I activate everything? I did not, because I just showed my gear around, right? Okay, so I press Smoke Mine. Smoke Mine is basically this. With automation, when you click it, it immediately explodes. It's basically just there for the extra buff, right? So we're just going to go through here. I'm currently doing a breach strat in Dunes. Don't mind me. There's going to be random breaches on this map. It is what it is. As you can see, I'm kind of just like running through, destroying everything. Let's do this real quick. Oops. All right. Yeah. You can kind of imagine how this one works on high investment. We're basically just shredding everything. Everything dies up ahead. Just kind of a thing. Buffs expire faster obviously means that our Headhunter stacks are going to fall off a little bit faster. It doesn't really matter either way. Let's go up to the A-bomb map. I wish I had more to say. You press Valhaste sometimes. It's just one of the most chill builds ever. You go to the boss, you go in, you probably plop down this, maybe plop down a few totems, but in general, you're just going to absolutely annihilate them. Now, I don't want to misrepresent this, just so you know. It's definitely a huge difference whether you, for example, do an A-bomb map or you do like a Katarina boss or something, right, where she stands in the middle. The fact that there's some walls here definitely helps out quite a bit, right? So if you want to play this build at its peak, you will definitely want to think about that as well. When it comes to tier 16s, there's basically no restrictions whatsoever. But once again, like I said in the intro, I would definitely not do Ubers on this or anything like that. Now, next up, let's talk about items. First up, the wands, which are probably the most annoying to make. These have double Fizzes extra, tier 1 mana, tier 1 attack speed, and then any sort of crit mod. Now, instead of that crit mod, you could also have crit multi and then craft on crit or something like that. The lightning and chaos res is kind of sloppy on me because I kind of already had my gear prepped and then I fucked up a bit. Doesn't really matter. I couldn't go Illyra, so yeah, yada yada yada. Either way, some combination of crit multi, attack speed, and crit chance on the suffix. Like I said, more on these later in the crafting section. One thing I want to address is people talking about Grace of the Goddess. Yes, a well-defined Grace of the Goddess is actually pretty close in damage to these wands and are significantly cheaper, right? We're talking instead of 50 to 250 divines, depending on how lucky you get, and it's a lot of variance. You're probably going to pay 10 divines, 15 divines. I don't know how much it's going to go up. No idea. But what you have to remember is you lose the Tormented Spirit enchant, and that is one of the biggest reasons why the dual wielding actually works, is because you get 70% movement speed from both combined. And we're not running Mage Blood to carry our movement speed. We're not on a Deadeye. So those 70% increased movement speed will make the build feel completely different. So you have to temper your expectations if you use Grace of the Goddess. In terms of Indigon, not much to be said. The bottom roll at max would be really strong. The maximum mana roll would be pretty strong. Implicits, either max life, cannot be blinded. Maybe you can play around with +2 levels. Whatever you want. In terms of this body armor, this is by far the most currency I put into this build and is completely useless in terms of like payoff versus currency. I would put all your money into your wands if I were you and actually get those Tormented Spirit mods. Do not get sidetracked by how ridiculous this body armor is. You don't want to make Maven Orbed body armor like this. I mean, maybe you can find a good one on trade. But the two important mods here is Maven Orbed or not, Explode and Spell Suppress. If you don't have a life roll, go for the Life Mastery right here and just get extra evasion and energy shield. If you don't have dex, get it elsewhere and just get res. It literally doesn't matter. Fizz damage reduction if you have an armor base, but you probably shouldn't. Both evasion and energy shield are actually quite important. In general, this is a complete overkill item, and just because we wanted to have some fun. Then talking about the amulet, your absolute GG amulet would be crit multi plus flat mana percentage mana hybrid, which is called Xopex. This is a temple mod, and you can get this on a focused or a simplex amulet by recombinating. But I ended up getting an absolute steal because whoever posted this had reduced cast speed on it, and at the time attack-based wand builds weren't really big, so I bought this one fairly cheap, and it has crit multi, it has Xopex. It is worse than this amulet, but I mean, I might as well use it. This is going to be a project we're going to try to finish. We're basically going to try and mirror it for double the effect. But either way, when it comes to gloves, the most important thing here is that you get a total of 60% conversion. The easiest quote-unquote way to get that is get 35% on the item itself and then get 25% in the implicit. The reason you can't really get 35% in the implicit is because you want 2 rage on attack hit. You could also settle on 1 rage on attack hit, but the consistency is a lot lower. A little adage here, in terms of what conversion you want to get, you get 40% lightning conversion from your passive tree, and the rest does not really matter as much. You don't want fire, but whether you're lightning or cold only matters in the fact that cold gives you freezes, which also gives you shatter, which means corpse explosions, which is incredibly strong, especially in tier 17s, whereas lightning gives you bigger shocks. Other than that, suppress is an absolute must-have. Attack speed, accuracy you can get wherever you want. As for boots, you want to get your ailment avoidance right here. We cannot use Eternal Blessing because we want to reserve Spellslinger, so no purity of elements for us. So you get 20% in the implicit, 30-ish% there, and then the rest we get from our jewel that we're going to go over in a little bit. Other than that, as much movement speed as you can, chaos res, whatever you want. As for your Headhunter, as much dex as possible. Dex is like one thing you have to solve for in this build quite a bit. Implicits, just keep life or go for extra movement speed, attack speed, res, multi. And then as for rings, these are really wide open as for what you can use. I'm opting to go for Onslaught for 4 seconds on hit. If you're, for example, a Mage Blood build, or maybe you go for a Silver Flask, you don't really need to do this. And then what you should probably do is just craft 1 Helical Ring and then mirror it with the Calandra's Touch, right? That's what you should most likely do. But I have 1 Helical Ring here to fix my resistances, and then 1 ring here to just get general mods. The strength here is completely worthless, but I didn't want to recraft. That's also why I have this dirty craft right here on my wand. As for flasks, there are 4 that are no-brainer, which is first up a Diamond Flask with crit chance, a Jade Flask with evasion rating, a Quicksilver Flask with movement speed, and then a Quartz Flask with reduced effect of curses. The last one is completely interchangeable. I didn't go for Progenesis because it's not that good on mana stackers, but it's still okay. I went for a gold flask because I wasn't doing like super hard content, and even in tier 17s, I was destroying everything on this much investment. And I got the rarity craft on top as well. One thing you can do, for example, here is go for a silver flask with reduced charges used, and then you wouldn't have to get the onslaught on hit right here on the topaz ring, and you could mirror one of your rings with the Calandra's touch. That would probably be a lot easier. And then let's talk about jewels. The most important one is Ancestral Vision right here, so you get the rest of your ailment avoidance on top of your boots. You have 100% spell suppress. This gives you 50% ailment avoidance. Make sure that you actually have this, otherwise it's going to feel quite bad. You're not going to be freeze immune. As for Watcher's Eye, you definitely want the chance to recover mana when you use a skill. That is the most important one. Second most important one is probably the other Clarity mod, and then the third one is kind of like whatever. If you can get, I mean, they're probably, I paid a lot for these. Extra attack speed, extra crit multi, or whatever, but I would definitely just go for these 2 Clarity mods before anything else. Immutable Force, this is kind of like a thing where you can get it, but you don't have to technically, depending on what content you run. I don't really ever get stunned without it. I just don't ever want to be in that situation, so I'm actually giving up a jewel slot for that. It is not totally necessary. Make sure that you get a 961 or higher. That's the cutoff point for actually feeling, I think it's exactly 1 server tick that you get stunned for. So that is really important. Then we have your Glorious Vanity. Just look whatever mods are good here. The one I have, there's a lot of other ones that are just as good with max mana here or suppression here. They can all help out. Look at your small nodes. Maybe they also give you, they can also give you suppression. They can give you mana, chaos res. Now the Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh are quite expensive. These are Inevitable Judgment. They basically makes it so you can ignore elemental resistances. These are actually not as crazy as you might think if you go for something like a Trinity support, and then you also get the reverse elemental resistance mastery right here, right? You would path here, you would probably cut the extra projectile, some stuff down here, and you would just path here, get the mastery, get Revenge of the Hunted, probably get the movement speed mastery. But the reason I like them the most is because I can kind of ignore map mods, which is especially nice in not having to reroll tier 17s as often. If you don't want to go for these or they're too expensive, you can also go for one of the other ones. I forgot how it's called. Righteous something. Righteous Providence right here. This one is quite strong as well. Or alternatively, don't go for any of them because the jewels that you can get on this build are actually insane, right? Percentage max life, percentage max mana, whatever you want to go for. Mana is a lot better, but you can get attack speed, crit multi, whatever you want. Mana, life, chaos res, whatever you need at the time. As for the gem setup, Kinetic Blast of Clustering, Awakened Fork, really strong. Awakened ally damage with attacks. Be careful when it comes to reflect immunity. I thought I was completely reflect immune. Then I realized that the Tormented Spirits can actually kill you against Reflect. It doesn't happen all that often, but it can happen. I still level to like 99 on this character with Reflect maps in there, but it can happen, just so you know. Returning Proj, very strong. Increased crit damage, and then Sacred Wisps. If you don't go Righteous Providence, you probably want to look into making something like Trinity work or even Elemental Penetration. Actually, Inevitable Judgment. I think I said right, something else. Inevitable Judgment is what I meant. Kinetic Blast of Clustering on a Ballista doesn't really, I mean, I don't really use it. It's just a 4-link. It's technically like 40 to 50% more damage. I put them down at tier 17s. I don't know if it actually makes a difference. You can use this for something else, but especially if you're on lower gear, this can help you out a lot with single target. Tornado is a must-have on your Spellslinger. 21 Spellslinger actually matters. The quality doesn't matter whatsoever, but the 21 does matter for Reservation. Then carrying our movement speed quite a bit is a Smoke Mine with Enhance and more duration right here. So what you want to activate your Smoke Mine is have Detonate Mines on your automation setup together with your Arcane Cloak. This will make it so whenever you throw the Smoke Mine, it automatically snappy activates and you just get, I think for me currently it's like 72% movement speed. I also chucked in the Ball Haste right here because now it's also connected to more duration, which is nice. Mark on hit with Sniper's Mark. This skill cannot split, but we're just using it for extra damage. It's just easy, right? Arcane Cloak, really important. It's in here with automation and Detonate Mines. I don't have Arcane Surge support because I don't need the mana regen or cast speed. And I also do not have more duration, so I can actually activate it more often and it chunks more mana for Indigon. Then we have Precision, which is very important, as high as possible. Accuracy is quite a bit of an issue right here. as is crit. Clarity, basically just for the Watcher's Eye at level 1. Both are reserved on mana. We're not using a Eternal Blessing setup because we can't, because otherwise we would have to reserve the Spell Slinger on life. I mean, it would get you down to like 1,500 life, which is not a good idea. And then I threw a Sigil of Power in there. You basically just put it down against bosses, so you have a little bit of extra defenses. That is about it for the gems. Next up, passive tree. You'll see this one is quite a bit different from most mana stackers, mostly because we're attack based. We want to get to the right side right here, but Hierophant is just too goddamn strong, and we need to be at mind over matter anyways, so this jump here is not that big. If you can fit in discipline and training, that would absolutely be huge. I did not know how to cope with my points. Gonna be completely honest here. You can also save a point here if you want to path through the int. You would lose 20% AoE, but honestly, I don't even know if you would notice at this point. Other than that, you can put a Light of Meaning up here if you really want to. In this radius, you would get quite a bit of chaos resistance or other things. I think only chaos resistance would really be valid, but that is a huge chaos resistance boost if you're willing to sacrifice a rare jewel. Don't forget about Corrupted Soul right here. Make it so you have a good point right there. For example, once again, spell suppression, mana, any of that jazz. In terms of the wand cluster, we don't want Elder Power because we already get so much increased damage from our Indigon that it actually does almost nothing. We just want the additional projectile right here. All of these crit nodes are super, super premium. This is where a lot of your accuracy comes from. We want this Lightning Mastery right here for the conversion. This is where 40% of your conversion comes from. Other than that, what else is important? The multi-shot, you will probably almost not even feel. It doesn't really help against single target all that much. So this is one of the easier cuts, as are these points right here. They're also easier cuts, especially if you have to path in there. The fork nodes are absolute no-brainers. Your energy shield leech will come from Storm Drinker, so be sure you get Storm Drinker as well as Scintillating Idea. The third point doesn't really matter. The only reason I path down here is because there's actually no way to get Scintillating Idea and Storm Drinker in front, so you just have to sacrifice this point right here. As for how to craft these, honestly, this one is like super inexpensive. I would just buy it. This one I will talk about in the crafting section back there. But basically what you're looking for is you're looking for a ton of attack and cast speed with Fizz skills, and then get either Ellie Res or Chaos Res or Dexterity, and then in the prefix either mana or life. Now let's talk about crafting. Linked down below, I will have TNG 2241's tutorial on how to craft these wands in detail. However, I will tell you right now that if you do not understand how new recombinators work, you will be lost. So that is why you would also have to know how this actually works. You would have to know what exclusive modifiers are and all of that jazz. I had to read into this as well. It is annoying. Crafting in PoE right now is way too convoluted in my opinion. It kind of sucks, especially if you played other ARPGs recently. I get that, but there's no other way of crafting these if you do not understand it. Otherwise, you're just going to throw your currency away. Once again, these can cost from 50 to 250 divines. I've heard all of the stories in between just by crafting without the Haunted Tormented Spirit enchant. So these are incredibly expensive, so you need to know what you're doing. So I'll have that link down below in the description. Then we have the body armor, which is exactly the same thing. If you understand recombinating, you know what to do. Otherwise, you won't. As I already talked about in the item section, do not get sidetracked or baited by this item. It is not as important as it looks like. The Explodey, elevated or not, is important. The spell suppression is important. Everything else, even the Fizz taken as the life roll, right? Instead of the life roll, get the life mastery. That only works if you don't have a life mod on your body armor. Get more evasion and energy shield. It's incredibly strong on this build. Instead of the prefixes, the spell suppress you have to have, the Fizz explode you have to have. Everything else, resistances, dexterity, you can move around on all your gear. If you put a lot of currency into your build, it should be into your wands, and forget about the body armor until you have everything covered. The third thing I'm going to talk about are the gloves. The priority mods on here are spell suppression and the conversion, with the life roll also being very important. So for example, if you start at a fractured life base, what you can do is you can spam Essences of Zeal right here. These even give you more attack speed than normal gloves will give you, which only go to 16%. These go up to 18. And you spam them until you get spell suppression plus another relevant mod, which for example would be accuracy, but it could also be resistances, right? Once again, you can move around resistances, dexterity, everything wherever you want. But attack speed and spell suppress are really nice to have. Once your suffixes are done in the prefix, you already have life locked in, and then all you do is suffixes cannot be changed, which you can get with a Wild Bristle Matron, which is a lot cheaper than actually doing suffixes cannot be changed. And then you just have to do Veiled Orb, which is quite expensive right now. I would settle on either Cold Conversion or Lightning Conversion. Fire conversion is a little bit iffy because Ignite absolutely does nothing. But if you want to be perfect, it would be Cold Conversion for that extra corpse explodey from the shatters. And then last but not least, this 12 passive cluster jewel, the way you make it is you get a physical damage one, which you need. You don't want to go spell damage. I know conversion, blah, blah, blah. But you want the attack speed mod. That is the most important one on here. The attack speed mod with physical. You want 35% increased effect, 3% increased attack and cast speed with physical skills. That has to be 3%. Otherwise, the 35% doesn't get it from 3 to 4. PoE doesn't do rounding up, right? So you need those first two mods. And the second two are kind of interchangeable. They could be Ele Res, Chaos Res, Dexterity. Once again, everything on this build is interchangeable. And then for the last prefix, you either go max mana or max life, or at least those are the premium ones. The easiest way to achieve this is to first get a 35% increased effect Fracture, which if you make it yourself with Fracturing Orbs, is round about 25 divines as of this recording to make the base. And then all you do is you buy some yellow juice and you start reforging speed right here. The only speed mod on this cluster is the attack speed mod. There's 3 tiers, 1, 2, and 3. It's a 1 and 4 to hit it because the tier 1 mod is actually a little bit less weight, has a little bit less weighting. But every 4th row on average, you're going to see that mod, and then you can slam Exalt, annul, and whatnot until you get a decent combination. As for leveling, you can basically do whatever. You can do Dex Stacker, you can do the new Wolf Tech, whatever works out for you, and then at level 70, you can respec, or level 80, or whatever you're doing, you can do 5 ways. 3 items I want to point out if you want to level as a Wanderer. I personally leveled with Power Siphon throughout the whole campaign, but that was because I did not know the Tornado interaction at that point. If I had known the Tornado interaction, at level 34, whenever you get Tornado, you go Tornado, Spellslinger, and you're probably going to destroy the game, at least from people that I've heard from who are leveling the build right now. So that's what I would personally do. Once again, you can literally start the build at level 34. However, I leveled this Power Siphon. Either way you go about it, if you go for Wander Out, which probably not going to be as efficient as the other ones, but you want to stay in theme, 3 items I want to shout out. The first one is Dodra's Tenure. This gives you 100% increased spell damage, which is actually 200 or 150 on Power Siphon, because it gets converted. The reduced cast speed is completely irrelevant, and the base line item I think actually requires level 12 or something, or even lower, right? You can get fancy corruptions for later, but that is a crazy damage increase early. Same goes for Azanov's Mark. This isn't there to proc anything. It's just a lot of spell damage, a lot of attack speed, which once again, the spell damage gets converted. And easy as well to fix your accuracy is Lacoste. Just a little tip, I would probably go for that during leveling as well. But that is about all I got for today. I'm gonna be honest, this build has kind of reinvigorated the love for this league for me, which I was already a little bit on a downward trend. I love the league, don't get me wrong. But I was kind of on my way out. I was like, okay, maybe I'm going to play 1 or 2 more weeks. And now I'm kind of refreshed, right? Like this skill is just so goddamn fun. And I also want to league strat test it for next league. So we're gonna see about that as well. In general, I hope you enjoyed the video. If you guys have different versions of the build, I would love to see it as well. I think there's a lot to be done with Kinetic Blast of Clustering. Obviously, like these first iterations of a build are never the best ones. So we're going to see how this kind of evolves throughout the next few leagues. Hope GGG doesn't nerf this because, yeah, it's a ton of fun. And with that being said, since I still don't have a slogan, see you next time.